Isn't he drop-dead gorgeous? Diana said it under her breath. Not to a camera, not to a room full of people. To one woman standing beside her in a hospital corridor, watching a man walk away who hadn't looked back once. That's the detail that got her. In a world where every man she encountered adjusted his posture the moment she entered a room, where every stranger stammered, every official straightened his tie, where even heads of state seemed to recalibrate when she walked in, this man had a patient to check on. He kept walking. He didn't look up. She watched him go, and then she noticed something that made her laugh out loud. Something small and ordinary and completely unlike anything she had ever found charming before. He'd written his own name on his shoes, not on a plaque, not on a brass nameplate outside an office. On the rubber sole of his white surgical shoes, the way junior doctors do when they're worried someone will walk off with them from the changing room. Just a name, scrawled in marker, on a pair of shoes belonging to a man who had just spent hours inside someone's chest cavity and was already moving toward the next patient before the door had closed behind him. That was the beginning. Not a state occasion, not a charity gala, not a carefully arranged introduction at a palace dinner where everyone knew their role before they sat down. A hospital corridor, a man who didn't look up, a name written on a pair of shoes. This is that story, and it is not a small story. It is the story of the most fully alive Diana ever was. Of the 2 years during which the most photographed woman on earth wore a dark wig to stand in a pub queue in Chelsea, during which she ironed a man's shirts in a one-bedroom flat she could have bought the building of, during which she flew to Pakistan, sat in gardens she'd never been invited to, wrote letters to a grandmother she'd never met, and told friends she was ready to walk away from everything. The title, the country, the faith she'd been born into for a heart surgeon from Jalem who had his name written on his shoes. Paul Burrell, who was there for all of it, testified under oath at the 2008 inquest. He said the princess told him this was her soulmate, not Dodie, not Charles. This man, the man she'd watched walk down a hospital corridor on an afternoon she hadn't been expecting anything at all. Everything in this script comes from documented accounts. From Hasnat Khan's own 2004 police statement, read into the public record, from his testimony at the 2008 inquest, from Paul Burrell's sworn evidence, from Tina Brown's The Diana Chronicles, built on interviews with the people who were in those rooms, from the accounts of Uno Tofolo, who was there when they met, and from Khan's uncle, Professor Jawad Sawid Khan, who was there for the early months nobody knew about. Nothing here is guesswork. Where the record is quiet, I'll tell you it's quiet. Before we go further, if this channel has ever shown you a Diana you hadn't seen before, take 1 second and subscribe. This one is worth it. Let's go back to that corridor. September 1995, the Royal Brompton Hospital, London. Diana was 34 years old and living alone in apartment 8 at Kensington Palace. The divorce from Charles had not yet been finalized. That would come the following year, but the marriage had been over in every way that mattered for years. She was separated publicly from a man the institution had already begun quietly reabsorbing. She still had her boys every other week. She still had her charity work. She still had the apartment. What she had lost was the structure, the schedule that had told her where to be and what to wear and who to smile at and how long to stay. The machinery of the monarchy that, for better and for worse, had organized every waking hour of her adult life. It had been suffocating, and now it was gone. And the freedom it left behind was a strange thing, vast and unlit, full of evenings where the boys were at school, and the phone didn't ring and the apartment was very quiet. She had told friends something specific around this time. She was finished with Englishmen, done with that world. Not another aristocrat, not another man who understood protocol and press calls and knew which fork to use at a state dinner. She wanted someone who had no connection to the life that had nearly broken her. Then Una Tofolo's husband had a heart attack. Una was Diana's acupuncturist. Her friend, one of the circle of women Diana had gathered around herself in the years when the palace had been closing its doors. Joseph Tofolo underwent triple bypass surgery at the Royal Brompton Hospital in London, and Diana did what Diana always did when people she loved were frightened. She came not once. She came regularly. She sat with Una in the waiting room. She walked the corridors. She visited Joseph on the ward. She was not there for cameras. There were no cameras. She was there because her friend needed her to be there. And on one of those visits, late August or early September 1995, a door opened and a doctor walked out. He was working for Professor Magdi Yaqub, one of the most eminent heart surgeons in the world. He was British Pakistani, educated at King Edward Medical College in Lahore, trained in Australia, now based in London on a junior surgeon's salary and brutal junior surgeon's hours. He was not wealthy, he was not connected. He did not, by any account, follow the tabloids. He was Hasnat Khan, Unag introduced them. Khan delivered an update on Joseph's condition, spoke briefly to both women, and then moved on. He had rounds. He kept walking, and Diana turned to Unag and said it, quietly, genuinely. "Isn't he drop-dead gorgeous?" And then she noticed his shoes. She came back the next day. She told Unag she wanted to check on Joseph. That was true. It wasn't the whole truth. She came back the day after that. And the day after that. For nearly 3 weeks, Diana found a reason to be at the Royal Brompton. She would walk the corridors. She would stop by the ward. She would be present in the way that only Diana could be present. Genuinely, warmly, without any of the performance that the world mistook for her entire personality. Khan noticed he would have had to be completely blind not to. He said so himself in his 2004 police statement. But he did nothing about it. He was uncomfortable with attention. He was focused on his work in the way that people who are very good at something tend to be focused, completely with everything else arranged around the edges. Diana found this incomprehensible and irresistible in equal measure. His own account of what happened next is one of the most quietly remarkable sentences in the entire public record of Diana's life. He said, "I did not think for 1 minute that she would say yes, but I asked her if she would like to come with me. I was very surprised when she said she would. She said yes, just like that. He needed to drive to Stratford-upon-Avon. His uncle lived there. He needed to collect some books. He asked Diana almost as an afterthought if she'd like to come along. She said yes, just like that. The Princess of Wales, the most photographed woman on the planet, into a car, heading to Stratford-upon-Avon to collect a stack of books. No security detail, no press, no schedule, just 2 people in a car and a road out of London. They arrived at his uncle's house and Diana walked in. His uncle was Professor Jawad Sawid Khan, his wife was there, and Diana sat with them as though it were the most natural thing in the world. No princess voice, no performance. She sat with his family and talked easily and stayed for dinner. His uncle remembered it clearly, years later. He said, "Diana used to stay here with Hasnat and the rest of us. We never let anyone know that she was here. From the very first visit, secrecy wasn't imposed on Diana, she chose it. She understood instinctively that this man's world only worked if it stayed quiet, and she was willing to keep it quiet. For the most photographed woman on the planet, that was the most radical thing she had ever done after the uncle's house. They went to dinner, a small Greek restaurant nearby. The manager, Lazarus Seferidis, later told the press what he had witnessed. She ordered moussaka. They shared fresh strawberries for dessert, and they sat at that table for 4.5 hours. 4.5 hours. No cameras, no chaperones, no palace schedule telling her where to be next. The restaurant manager said they barely looked at their food, that they seemed more interested in each other than anything the kitchen sent out. She drove back to London past midnight. That was the beginning, not a fairy tale, not a state occasion, a drive to pick up books that turned into dinner, and 4.5 hours in a woman, past midnight, already knowing that something had changed. What came after required work? Careful, deliberate, sometimes genuinely absurd work. Diana developed a system. When she called Khan at the hospital, she didn't leave her own name. She used an alias, Dr. Armani. The nurses on his ward had no idea who kept ringing for the quiet Pakistani surgeon. They just knew that a Dr. Armani called a lot and always wanted him specifically. When she went out with Khan in Chelsea, she wore a dark wig and oversized sunglasses. She'd done it so many times it became routine. Pulling the wig on in the back seat, adjusting it in the rear-view mirror, stepping out onto the street as someone else entirely. They'd walk together through the neighborhood, grab food, stand in line outside Ronnie Scott's jazz club in Soho like 2 ordinary people with nowhere particular to be. Khan later said she loved queuing, that she said you meet the most interesting people when you're standing in a line. She had danced with John Travolta at the White House. She had dined with presidents. She had never once in her adult life stood in a queue. Khan gave her that. There is another pub detail that tells you everything you need to know about what this relationship meant to her. One afternoon, Khan took her to a pub near Harefield Hospital where he'd worked earlier in his career. Diana looked up at the sign above the door and started laughing. The pub was called the Prince of Wales. Getting Khan into Kensington Palace was its own operation. Paul Burrell, Diana's butler, would fold Khan into the boot of his car, drive through the palace gates as though running a normal errand, and let him out once they were safely inside. It sounds like a scene from a film. It was a Tuesday night. Once Khan was inside, Diana became someone the public had never seen. Burrell testified to it at the 2008 inquest. He would tell the chef the princess was extra hungry. Could he please prepare double portions? The chef never asked why. Burrell would set up candlelit dinners in the private dining room, then disappear. He organized it all, he said, this whole secret world, so they could simply be together. But Diana didn't only bring Khan to the palace. She went to him, to his flat in Chelsea, small, cluttered, a one-bedroom, and she cleaned it. She ironed his shirts. She stood over his ironing board pressing the shirts of a man who had just finished a 16-hour shift, and she did it not because anyone expected it of her but because she wanted to. Burrell said it plainly. She would go to his dirty flat and do his ironing. She didn't do her own ironing, but she did Hasnot's. Think about that. A woman who had had household staff her entire life, footmen, dressers, housekeepers, ladies-in-waiting, standing in a one-bedroom flat in Chelsea with an iron, reaching, through every gesture, for the ordinary life that had been denied her since she was 20 years old. She introduced him to William and Harry. Khan's own police statement confirmed it. Diana just wanted her sons to know what was happening in her life. She wasn't hiding Khan from the people who mattered most. She was only hiding him from everyone else, and Tina Brown, in the Diana Chronicles, wrote what the people around Diana confirmed from every direction. This was the most fulfilling relationship of Diana's life. Not the marriage, not the affair with Hewitt, not the 30 days with Dodie that the tabloids would later make into something it wasn't. This, the wigs and the ironing and the KFC on the floor of Kensington Palace, and the candlelit dinners that the chef never questioned. Picture her on an evening in 1996, cross-legged on the carpet, no gown, no diamonds, eating fried chicken from the box with a man who has just come off a shift that would have broken most people. The television is on. Nobody is watching. Nobody knows he is there. That was the life she wanted. She didn't want to hide forever. The secrecy that protected them was also slowly suffocating her. She wanted to marry him. And in the world Hasnet Khan came from, that meant one thing before anything else could happen. It meant the family. The Khans were a respected Pashtun family from Jhelum, a city about 120 miles north of Lahore. The center of that family, the person whose opinion carried more authority than anyone else's, was Khan's grandmother, Mrs. Forkunda Ayub. The family called her Nani Appa. She was elderly, deeply traditional, deeply devout, and her word on family matters was final. If Nani Appa didn't approve of a bride, there was no wedding. It didn't matter what the groom wanted. The matriarch decided. Diana understood this immediately. She had spent 15 years inside the most hierarchical family in Europe. She knew how power moved through a household. She knew that titles meant nothing if the people at the top didn't accept you. So she wrote to the grandmother directly. For months, Diana sent handwritten letters to Nani Appa in Pakistan, the Princess of Wales corresponding privately with an elderly woman in Jhelum, trying to build a relationship before they ever met face to face. Then she arranged for Nani Appa to visit Kensington Palace, August 1996. Khan's uncle Omar brought her, along with his British wife Jane and a teenage cousin. Diana was waiting at the front door when they arrived. Not in a drawing room, not seated on a sofa with an aide beside her. At the door. Like a woman welcoming guests into her own home. She had prepared carefully. She presented Nani Appa with a silver rose bowl. She laid out tea, and then the moment happened. A video camera quietly captured it, when Nani Appa reached up and touched Diana's cheek. A grandmother's touch, gentle, accepting. Diana's face changed completely, the relief flooded through her visibly. She had been terrified, she had wanted so badly to be accepted, and this one small gesture, a hand on her cheek, gave her hope. She noticed too when Nani Appa picked up a sandwich and lifted the corner of the bread to check. Diana said immediately, "It's salmon." She had thought of everything. She had thought of a detail that most people hosting a tea party for the Queen of England would not have thought of. And she flew to Pakistan, twice. February 1996 and May 1997. She sat in the family's garden in Jhelum in a salwar kameez with no photographer within miles. She asked Jemima Khan, Imran's wife, a British woman who had married into a Pakistani family, how hard it had been to adapt. What cultural bridges needed crossing, what she was walking into. Jemima was honest with her. She said for a son to marry an English girl is every conservative Pashtun mother's worst nightmare. You send your son to be educated in England, and he comes back with an English bride. It's something they dread. Diana heard that, she understood it, and she kept going anyway. She told friends she would convert to Islam. She had been exploring the faith for months, quietly and genuinely. She asked Imran Khan to act as a marriage broker, to go to Hasnat directly and make the case for the marriage. Imran later said in an ITV documentary that Diana wanted to marry Dr. Hasnat Khan, that she had decided he was the man, that it was clear she was very deeply in love with him. She asked Burrell to explore whether a private ceremony was even possible. His parish priest was consulted. She scouted countries where they might live together permanently: Pakistan, South Africa, Australia, places where the British tabloids might not find them, places where they could build something that belonged to them. She was willing to walk away from everything: the country, the faith, the title, the whole structure of the life she had been living since she was 20 years old, and the man she wanted to walk away for couldn't let her do it. Khan's reasoning was not indifference. That has to be said clearly. His own testimony, his own words across multiple accounts, make plain that he loved her. Paul Burrell said under oath that both of them were desperately in love and apart anyway. But Khan saw something Diana couldn't fully accept. He said it to Burrell directly: "I don't want to be known as just Mr. Diana. I want my world. I want to be a surgeon." He had built his life around one thing: the work, the hours inside operating theaters, the patience, the skill he had spent his entire adult life developing. He knew, and he was not wrong, that a marriage to Diana would end all of that. Not because he would choose to stop, but because the world would not let him continue. The cameras would follow him to the hospital, the press would stake out his patience. The thing he had built himself into would be dismantled by proximity to the most famous woman on earth. His 2008 inquest statement was even more direct. He said his main concern about marriage was that his life would be hell because of who she was, that he would not be able to live a normal life, that if they ever had children, he would not be able to take them anywhere or do ordinary things with them. And there was something else. Since the tabloids had exposed their relationship, Khan had been receiving death threats, actual physical threats. Photographs of his face with a noose drawn around his neck, mailed anonymously. A man who spent his life saving people was being told by strangers that he should lose his. He was pulling back, not out of cruelty, out of something much harder to argue with. He was probably right. The relationship ended in the summer of 1997. Diana had gone to the south of France aboard Mohammed Al Fayed's yacht, the Jonikal. When she came back, Khan felt something had shifted. He said in his police statement that after a few days he felt something was wrong, that she had been acting differently, that when he asked her about it, she said it was problems with her phone reception. He didn't believe her. They met in Battersea Park, neutral ground. A bench by the river surrounded by joggers and dog walkers and people who had no idea that the most famous woman in England was sitting 10 feet away. Khan sat with her and knew. The following day, at Kensington Palace, Diana ended it. Khan's words from his statement: "It was at that second meeting that Diana told me it was all over between us. She didn't explain why. She didn't cry. She just said it was done." And then Khan said something to her, a warning delivered in the shock of the moment, that would sit differently 6 weeks later, when everything in Paris was over and the words couldn't be taken back. I remember saying to her at the time, "You are dead." He meant her reputation was dead. He meant that whoever she had met on the Al Fayed yacht would damage her publicly. He was warning her, not predicting, warning. He couldn't have known how those words would sound after August 31st. Her friend Rosa Monckton, who took Diana to Greece in mid-August, testified under oath that Diana was not over Khan, that everything with Dodi was surface, that she was grieving, that the man she was still in love with was a heart surgeon from Jalem who had written his name on his shoes. Burrell confirmed it from his side. He said he had been worried about Diana entering the new relationship so quickly. Not because of Dodi, because of Khan. Because both of them were desperately in love with each other and apart anyway. Chris Anderson, who wrote The Day Diana Died, put it most plainly of all. If Hasnat Khan had called and proposed, Diana would have dropped everything and come running in an instant. He didn't call. Khan never sold his story. Not once. Every offer, and there were many, across the years, across the decades, was turned down. The book deals, the interview fees, the documentary proposals. He took none of it. Diana had said it in one of the last conversations she had about him that summer before Paris. She said, "Hasnat is the one person who will never sell me out." He didn't. Of every person who passed through Diana's life, the courtiers who leaked, the friends who wrote memoirs, the staff who sold photographs, the family members who stayed quiet when she needed them most, the one who kept his word was a heart surgeon who never wanted to be famous and never became so. That is the truth of why she called him the love of her life. Not just because of what she felt, because of who he was. Because he was the one person in her world who had nothing to gain from her and wanted nothing from her except to sit across a restaurant table for 4.5 hours talking until midnight. She had spent her adult life surrounded by people who needed something from her. Her image, her name, her cooperation with the institution. Her silence about things that deserved to be spoken. Khan needed none of it. He needed her to let him keep doing his work. And that simplicity, the pure, clean simplicity of a man who just wanted to save lives and go home, was the most exotic thing Diana had ever encountered. Leave her in Stratford-upon-Avon, September 1995. It's getting late. The books are in the car. Dinner is finished. She has been sitting at a table in a small restaurant in an English market town with a man she met 5 days ago in a hospital corridor, and she has not thought once about cameras, not once about the palace, not once about the divorce papers waiting on a desk at a solicitor's office in London. She is 34 years old. She has dined with kings and danced with presidents. She has worn more tiaras than most people have worn hats. She has been the most watched woman on earth for 13 years, every expression catalogued, every outfit analyzed, every private grief eventually made public. And tonight she ordered moussaka in a restaurant that nobody important has ever heard of and shared strawberries for dessert with a man who has his name written on his shoes. The restaurant manager will remember it for the rest of his life. He will say they seemed more interested in each other than the food. He will say they sat there 4.5 hours. He will say neither of them were extravagant in what they ate. What he won't be able to describe, because you can't describe it, not really, not with words that do it justice, is the look on her face. The face of a woman who has been performing for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to simply be, who has spent 13 years in rooms where everyone knew who she was and adjusted accordingly, who is now sitting across from the one man in all those rooms and all those years, who looked at her and saw a person first. He hadn't looked up when she first saw him. He'd had a patient to check on. He kept walking. That's what got her. That's what it came down to in the end. Not the title or the palace or the fairy tale or the 35 gowns she auctioned for charity. The thing that got her was a man who didn't look up. She never got over him. The record is clear on that. The people who were with her at the end, Rosa Monckton in Greece, Burrell in Kensington Palace, the friends who spoke under oath about who she was still in love with that last summer, they all said the same thing in different words. She was still in love with the man from the hospital. She was always in love with the man from the hospital. The most famous woman in the world. The most private man she ever met. 2 years of wigs and ironing and KFC on the floor and candlelit dinners, the chef never questioned. And at the end of it all, a bench in Battersea Park and 4 words, "It is all over," and a heart surgeon who went back to his work. He never sold her out. She always knew he wouldn't. Thank you for staying with me through this one. I know it's a story some of you have heard pieces of before, but the pieces matter. The name on the shoes, the strawberries, the 4.5 hours, the grandmother's hand on Diana's cheek, the ironing board in the Chelsea flat. That's where Diana actually lived, not in the photographs, not in the palace, not in the gowns, in the small, quiet, ordinary details of a life she was only ever allowed to borrow. And the man who gave it to her, briefly and imperfectly and not quite enough. He gave her more of herself than anyone else ever did. That's why she called him the love of her life. And that's why all these years later we're still telling the story.